The ancient cathedral stood as a monolith against the gray sky, its weathered stones whispering secrets of centuries past. Ivy crawled up its grand facade, weaving through the intricate carvings that depicted scenes from a forgotten era. To the group of historians and restorers gathered at its base, the structure was not just a building, but a portal to history. Dr. Eleanor Price, the lead historian, stood before her team, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "This is the most significant project of our careers," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the open space. "The Cathedral of Saint Armand holds centuries of history, and it's our job to uncover it and restore its former glory." The team, consisting of archaeologists, historians, and restoration experts, nodded eagerly. Among them was Thomas Blake, a young archaeologist with a passion for uncovering the past, and Rachel Chen, a skilled restoration artist known for her meticulous attention to detail. As they stepped inside the cathedral, the air grew colder, carrying the scent of damp stone and decay. The vast nave was filled with shadows, and the only light came from the stained glass windows, casting eerie patterns on the floor. Dust motes danced in the beams, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. Thomas ran his fingers over the rough stone walls, feeling the history embedded in each crack and crevice. "Imagine what this place has seen," he mused aloud. "The ceremonies, the prayers, the lives that passed through here." Rachel, standing beside him, nodded. "It's beautiful, in a haunting sort of way." Dr. Price led them further into the cathedral, pointing out areas of interest. "We'll start with the nave and work our way towards the apse. There's a lot of restoration work to be done, but I believe we'll uncover some incredible artifacts along the way." As they moved deeper into the cathedral, the team couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional sound of dripping water echoing through the halls. In the dim light, they began their work, carefully documenting and preserving the fragile remnants of history. Hours passed, and the sense of unease grew. Thomas was the first to notice something strange, a series of symbols carved into the stone floor near the altar. "Eleanor, come look at this," he called out, his voice tinged with curiosity and a hint of fear. Dr. Price hurried over, her eyes widening as she examined the carvings. "These symbols, they don't match any known Christian iconography. They look more like pagan runes." Rachel joined them, her face pale. "What do they mean?" Dr. Price shook her head. "I'm not sure. We'll need to research them further. But this suggests that the cathedral may have a much darker history than we initially thought." As they documented the symbols, the light from the stained glass windows began to fade, casting longer shadows across the floor. The team decided to call it a day and return to their temporary lodgings, promising to resume their work in the morning. That night, as they settled into the small inn near the cathedral, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He lay awake, listening to the creaking of the old building and the distant hooting of an owl. The symbols they had discovered played over and over in his mind, a puzzle he was determined to solve. Just as he was drifting off to sleep, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, jolting him upright. Heart pounding, he rushed to the window and looked out toward the cathedral. In the darkness, he saw a faint, ghostly figure standing in the doorway, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The figure vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving Thomas staring into the night, his mind racing with questions. What had they awoken in the Cathedral of Saint Armand? And what dark secrets lay hidden within its ancient walls? As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Thomas knew one thing for certain: their project had just taken a terrifying turn. Morning broke over the small village, casting the cathedral in a soft, golden light. The eerie events of the previous night lingered in the minds of the restoration team as they gathered for breakfast in the inn's dining room. Thomas's eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, and he recounted his midnight sighting to the group. "A ghostly figure," Dr. Price repeated, her brow furrowing. "Are you sure it wasn't a trick of the light?" Thomas shook his head. "I'm certain. It was as real as anything I've ever seen. There was something unnatural about it." Rachel shivered. "Maybe the symbols we found have something to do with it." Dr. Price pursed her lips. "Let's focus on our work and keep an eye out for anything unusual. We need to approach this scientifically." The team made their way back to the cathedral, the massive doors creaking open to reveal the shadowy interior. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows, illuminating the symbols carved into the stone floor. The cathedral seemed to hum with a silent, unseen energy. As they resumed their work, the sense of being watched grew stronger. Every now and then, someone would glance over their shoulder, certain they had seen a shadow flit by or heard a faint whisper. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, they pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. Thomas and Rachel focused on documenting the mysterious symbols, painstakingly tracing each rune onto sheets of paper. They sent the sketches to an expert in ancient languages, hoping for some insight into their meaning. Meanwhile, Dr. Price led a small group to explore the cathedral's hidden passages, determined to uncover its secrets. Deep within the bowels of the cathedral, they discovered a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. The air grew colder as they descended, the light from their torches flickering against the damp stone walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their footsteps echoing through the tight space. At the bottom of the staircase, they found a small, hidden chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with dusty tomes and ancient artifacts. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, stained dark with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Dr. Price approached the altar, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch it. "This is where it happened," she whispered. "The rituals. The sacrifices." One of the team members, a young historian named Mark, examined the tomes. "These books detail the rituals performed here," he said, his voice shaking. "They were trying to summon something, or someone." Dr. Price nodded grimly. "It seems the cathedral was used for more than just Christian worship. We need to be very careful." As they documented the chamber, a sudden chill swept through the room, extinguishing their torches. In the pitch black, they heard a low, guttural whisper, ancient and malevolent. Panic set in as they fumbled to relight their torches, the darkness pressing in on them like a living thing. When the light finally returned, they saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the entrance to the chamber, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It raised a skeletal hand, pointing directly at them. The air grew thick with a sense of impending doom. "Go! Now!" Dr. Price shouted, and the team scrambled up the staircase, the figure's gaze burning into their backs. They burst into the nave, gasping for breath, their hearts pounding with terror. Back in the relative safety of the main hall, they tried to process what had just happened. "We need to find a way to protect ourselves," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "These spirits are not at peace." Dr. Price nodded, her face pale but determined. "We'll consult the manuscripts and the artifacts we found. There must be a way to appease them." As they regrouped and continued their work, the sense of dread hung over them like a shroud. The cathedral's dark history was slowly revealing itself, and with each discovery, the malevolent presence grew stronger. The echoes of the past were not just memories. They were living nightmares, waiting to be unleashed. And so, the team pressed on, unaware of the true horror that awaited them within the cursed walls of the Cathedral of Saint Armand. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cathedral grounds. The team worked tirelessly until dusk, their minds preoccupied with the eerie discoveries of the day. As the last light faded, they decided to retire to the inn, exhausted but unable to shake the sense of foreboding that clung to them. After a quiet dinner, the team members retreated to their rooms, each grappling with their thoughts. Thomas lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the ghostly figure from the previous night haunting his mind. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him. Just past midnight, Thomas heard it again, a blood-curdling scream slicing through the silence. He bolted upright, his heart pounding in his chest. This time, the scream was followed by a series of frantic footsteps and muffled voices. Throwing on his coat, Thomas rushed out of his room and into the dimly lit hallway. He wasn't alone. Other team members emerged from their rooms, faces pale and eyes wide with fear. They hurried outside, where the source of the commotion became apparent. At the edge of the cathedral grounds, Mark was standing, his face contorted in terror. His hands trembled as he pointed towards the cathedral. "I saw it," he stammered. "The figure. It was inside my room. It whispered my name." Dr. Price placed a reassuring hand on Mark's shoulder. "Calm down, Mark. Tell us exactly what happened." Mark took a shaky breath. "I woke up to a cold breeze. When I opened my eyes, the figure was standing at the foot of my bed. It looked right at me and whispered, 'Leave this place, or suffer the consequences.' Then it vanished." The team exchanged uneasy glances. Rachel spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to take this seriously. These aren't just random occurrences. The spirits are trying to warn us." Dr. Price nodded. "We can't ignore this any longer. We need to find out what these spirits want and how to appease them. For tonight, we should stay together. Safety in numbers." They gathered in the inn's common room, huddled together as the hours ticked by. Despite their exhaustion, no one dared to sleep. The inn's creaking walls and distant howls of the wind only added to their growing sense of dread. As dawn approached, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift slightly. The team, though weary, felt a renewed determination to uncover the truth behind the cathedral's dark history. They agreed to return to the cathedral at first light, armed with a plan to delve deeper into its secrets. With the morning sun, they made their way back to the cathedral, its imposing silhouette looming against the brightening sky. The group gathered at the entrance, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. They decided to split into smaller groups to cover more ground, each tasked with a specific area of the cathedral. Thomas and Rachel were assigned to the crypts beneath the cathedral, a place they had yet to explore. The air grew colder as they descended the stone steps, the darkness thickening around them. Their flashlights pierced the gloom, revealing rows of ancient tombs and cobweb-covered alcoves. As they moved deeper into the crypts, they stumbled upon an old iron gate, rusted but still intact. Beyond it lay a smaller, hidden chamber. The lock was brittle with age, and with a firm push, they managed to break it open. Inside, they found a single ornate coffin, covered in symbols similar to those they had found earlier. Thomas's hand shook as he traced the carvings. This must be significant. Whoever is buried here was important to the rituals. Rachel nodded. "We need to document this and show it to Dr. Price. It could be the key to understanding the spirit's unrest." As they turned to leave, a low moan echoed through the crypts, sending chills down their spines. They exchanged a fearful glance and hurried back to the main hall, where the rest of the team awaited their report. Dr. Price listened intently as they described their findings. This coffin and its carvings could indeed hold the answers we're looking for. We need to research these symbols further and see if we can find any records of the person buried there. As the day wore on, the team worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of the cathedral's dark history. Each discovery brought them closer to the truth, but also deepened the sense of dread that hung over them. That night, they prepared for another vigil in the common room, determined to face whatever horrors might come. The spirits of the Cathedral of Saint Armand were growing more restless, and the team knew they had little time left to uncover the truth and find a way to appease the vengeful entities. As the darkness closed in around them, the team braced themselves for another night of terror, knowing that the true horror of the cathedral was still waiting to be revealed. Morning light filtered through the cathedral's stained glass windows, casting vibrant colors on the floor. The team gathered around a large table in the nave, their faces lined with fatigue but resolute. The previous night's events weighed heavily on them, but they were determined to push forward. Dr. Price addressed the group, her voice steady. We need to focus our efforts on the hidden chamber and the coffin Thomas and Rachel discovered. If the symbols on that coffin are the same as the ones we found earlier, they might hold the key to understanding the spirit's unrest. Thomas and Rachel laid out the sketches they had made of the symbols, comparing them to the carvings in the nave. The similarities were striking. These runes are definitely connected, Thomas said. We need to find out what they mean. Dr. Price nodded. Let's split up. Thomas, Rachel, and I will go back to the crypts and see if we can find more clues. Mark, you and the others should continue exploring the cathedral for any additional hidden chambers or artifacts. The team agreed and set off, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. As Thomas, Rachel, and Dr. Price descended into the crypts, the air grew colder and the light dimmer. Their flashlights illuminated the ancient walls, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. They reached the hidden chamber and the ornate coffin, its runes glowing faintly in the torchlight. Dr. Price examined the carvings closely, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns. These symbols are definitely ritualistic. They seem to be a mix of pagan and early Christian iconography, suggesting a time of transition or conflict. Rachel pointed to a particularly elaborate symbol. This one looks like a binding rune. It might have been used to trap a spirit or entity within the coffin. Thomas's eyes widened. If that's true, then opening this coffin could have released whatever was trapped inside. Dr. Price nodded grimly. We need to document this thoroughly and see if we can find any references to these symbols in the manuscripts we found. As they worked, a faint, sorrowful wail echoed through the crypts, sending chills down their spines. They exchanged uneasy glances but continued their task, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. Back in the main hall, Mark and the others had made a startling discovery. Hidden behind a large tapestry, they found another concealed doorway. It led to a narrow staircase that spiraled downwards, much like the one leading to the crypts. With a sense of foreboding, they descended, their flashlights piercing the darkness. At the bottom, they found a small room filled with ancient relics and manuscripts. Among them was a large, leather-bound tome, its pages brittle with age. Mark carefully opened it, revealing detailed descriptions of rituals and ceremonies performed in the cathedral. "This is incredible," Mark whispered. "These documents might contain the answers we're looking for." As they pored over the tome, they found references to a cult that had used the cathedral for dark rituals, blending pagan and Christian practices to summon and bind spirits. The cult's leader, a figure shrouded in mystery, was said to have been buried in a secret chamber within the cathedral, his spirit bound to protect the sacred grounds. Mark's heart pounded as he read on. It says here that the leader's spirit can only be appeased by a ritual of redemption, performed with the same artifacts used in the original ceremonies. He gathered the documents and hurried back to the main hall, where the rest of the team had reconvened. "I think we found what we need," he said, holding up the tome. "There's a ritual of redemption that might be able to set the spirits free." Dr. Price examined the tome, her expression thoughtful. "We need to find these artifacts and perform the ritual. It's our only chance to appease the spirits and end this nightmare." The team spent the rest of the day searching the cathedral for the artifacts described in the tome. They found an ancient chalice, a ceremonial dagger, and a set of candles, each imbued with a sense of power and history. As dusk fell, they gathered in the nave, preparing for the ritual. The atmosphere grew tense as they set up the altar, arranging the artifacts according to the instructions in the tome. The air seemed to thrum with anticipation, the shadows deepening around them. As the first candle was lit, a cold wind swept through the cathedral, extinguishing the torches and plunging them into darkness. The team stood close together, their breaths visible in the frigid air. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, and ghostly figures began to appear, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Dr. Price's voice trembled but remained steady. "Begin the ritual. We must finish it before the spirits can stop us." Thomas, holding the chalice, stepped forward and began to recite the ancient incantation from the tome. The words echoed in the cathedral, resonating with a power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. As the ritual progressed, the spirits grew more agitated, their whispers turning to screams. The team pressed on, determined to see it through. When the final words were spoken, a blinding light filled the cathedral, and the spirits let out a collective wail before vanishing into the ether. Silence fell, and the team stood in stunned disbelief. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and the cathedral seemed almost serene. Dr. Price let out a sigh of relief. "It's over," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We've done it." But as they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, a low, menacing growl echoed through the hall. The ground trembled, and a deep, malevolent voice filled the air. "You may have freed the spirits," it said, "but you have awakened something far worse." The team froze, their blood turning to ice. The true horror of the cathedral was just beginning, and they realized with dawning dread that their ordeal was far from over. The team stood paralyzed in the cathedral's nave, the echo of the malevolent voice still reverberating through the ancient stone walls. The air grew heavy with an oppressive darkness, and an unnatural chill seeped into their bones. They exchanged terrified glances, each wondering what new terror they had unleashed. Dr. Price tried to steady her voice. "We need to stay calm. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The team nodded, though fear was etched into every face. They decided to regroup at the inn and formulate a plan. As they left the cathedral, the shadows seemed to follow them, lingering just beyond the reach of their flashlights. Back at the inn, they huddled in the common room, the fire crackling weakly in the hearth. Thomas spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "We freed the spirits, but what was that voice? It sounded ancient." Rachel shivered. "It felt like pure evil, something much darker than the spirits we've encountered." Mark thumbed through the tome they had found earlier. "There must be something in here about what we've awakened. The cult that used the cathedral for their rituals. What else were they trying to summon?" Dr. Price scanned the pages over Mark's shoulder. "There's mention of an eternal guardian, a being summoned to protect the sacred grounds. But if it's been corrupted, it could be the source of the malevolence we're feeling. As they discussed their findings, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost crept up the windows, and their breath became visible in the cold air. A sense of dread filled the room, and the shadows in the corners seemed to move on their own. Suddenly, the fire in the hearth extinguished, plunging them into darkness. The oppressive silence was broken by the sound of whispering, a cacophony of voices overlapping and growing louder. The team huddled together, their flashlights flickering as if fighting against the darkness. Rachel screamed as a shadowy figure emerged from the corner of the room, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The figure moved closer, its form shifting and changing, a mass of darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. Dr. Price stepped forward, her voice shaking but resolute. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure paused, the whispering voices coalescing into a single, chilling sentence. "You have trespassed upon sacred ground. You must pay the price." The shadows surged forward, and the team scattered, each member trying to escape the encroaching darkness. Thomas felt a cold hand grasp his shoulder, and he screamed as he was pulled into the blackness. Rachel and Mark tried to reach him, but the shadows were too strong. As Thomas disappeared, the room was suddenly filled with a blinding light. The shadows recoiled, retreating to the corners. When the light faded, Thomas was gone, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly. Rachel fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "We need to find him. We can't leave him to whatever that thing is." Dr. Price nodded, her face pale but determined. "We'll find him, Rachel, but we need to understand what we're dealing with first." They returned to the cathedral at dawn, armed with what knowledge they had gleaned from the tome. As they entered the nave, the sense of malevolence returned, stronger than before. The shadows seemed to watch them, waiting for their next move. Dr. Price led them to the hidden chamber where they had found the ornate coffin. If this eternal guardian was summoned to protect the cathedral, then there must be a way to banish it, or at least neutralize its power. Mark flipped through the tome, searching for any clues. "Here," he said, pointing to a passage. "The guardian can be bound again, but it requires a powerful ritual, one that must be performed at the altar in the main hall." They gathered the necessary artifacts and made their way to the altar. As they prepared for the ritual, the shadows in the cathedral grew restless, swirling around them like a dark storm. Rachel lit the candles, her hands shaking. "We need to be quick. The guardian is growing stronger." Dr. Price began the incantation, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. The shadows pressed closer, the whispering voices growing louder. Mark and Rachel joined in, their voices blending with Dr. Price's in a desperate attempt to complete the ritual. As the final words were spoken, the shadows surged forward, engulfing them in darkness. The candles flickered and died, and for a moment, all was silent. Then, with a deafening roar, the shadows exploded outward, and a blinding light filled the cathedral. The team was thrown to the ground, and when they looked up, they saw the figure of the guardian, its form now solid and terrifying. It towered above them, eyes burning with rage. "You cannot bind me," it growled. "I am eternal!" Dr. Price struggled to her feet, determination in her eyes. "We may not be able to bind you, but we will fight you." With a final desperate effort, they continued the ritual, their voices rising in a chorus of defiance. The guardian screamed, its form beginning to waver. The light grew brighter, and the shadows retreated, finally dissipating into nothingness. When the light faded, the cathedral was silent. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. The team stood together, breathing heavily, their faces showing a mix of relief and exhaustion. "We did it," Mark said, his voice shaking. "We banished it." But as they looked around the empty cathedral, they knew their ordeal was not over. Thomas was still missing, and the dark history of the Cathedral of Saint Armand still held many secrets. With a renewed sense of determination, they vowed to uncover the truth and find their missing friend, knowing that the shadows of the past were never truly gone. The dawn of the next day brought a somber light to the Cathedral of Saint Armand. The team, now exhausted and worn, gathered in the main hall. The echoes of their recent encounter with the Guardian still reverberated in their minds, but the memory of Thomas's disappearance drove them to push forward. "We need to find Thomas," Rachel said, her voice resolute despite the fear that lingered in her eyes. "And to do that, we have to understand more about the rituals performed here." Dr. Price nodded, her expression serious. "The manuscripts we found spoke of a sacrificial altar. If we can find it, we might uncover more about the rituals and what happened to Thomas." They split into two groups. Dr. Price, Rachel, and Mark would search the cathedral's main areas, while the rest of the team would explore the surrounding grounds and nearby buildings for any signs of the altar. As Dr. Price's group moved through the cathedral, they noticed an increase in strange occurrences. Faint whispers echoed through the halls, and shadows seemed to flit just out of sight. Despite their fear, they pressed on, determined to find answers. In a forgotten corner of the cathedral, they discovered a large tapestry depicting scenes of sacrifice and rituals. Behind it, they found a hidden door, its wood ancient and rotting. Mark pushed it open, revealing a narrow passageway that led downward into darkness. The air grew colder as they descended, the walls damp with age and neglect. At the end of the passage, they found themselves in a cavernous chamber. The sight before them sent chills down their spines. The sacrificial altar stood in the center of the room, its surface stained with dark, dried blood. Surrounding it were ancient relics and symbols, similar to those they had found before. The oppressive atmosphere was almost tangible, pressing down on them like a physical weight. Rachel approached the altar, her eyes fixed on the dark stains. "This is where they performed the rituals," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is where they made their sacrifices." Dr. Price examined the symbols carved into the altar. "These are the same as the ones on the coffin and in the manuscripts. This altar is the key to understanding the rituals." Mark picked up an ancient book lying nearby, its pages brittle with age. "This looks like a detailed account of the rituals performed here," he said, carefully opening the book. "It might tell us how to reverse whatever was done and bring Thomas back." As they read through the book, they learned of the dark ceremonies conducted by the cult that once occupied the cathedral. The rituals involved binding spirits and summoning entities, using sacrifices to gain power and protection. The most chilling part was the description of the Eternal Guardian, summoned to protect the sacred grounds, but twisted into a force of malevolence over time. Rachel's eyes widened as she read further. "It says here that the only way to free those bound by the rituals is to perform a counter-ritual using the same altar and artifacts." Dr. Price looked determined. "We need to gather the artifacts and prepare for the counter-ritual. It's the only way to save Thomas and put an end to this nightmare." As they gathered the necessary items, the shadows in the chamber grew restless, swirling around them like a dark storm. The temperature dropped further and a sense of dread filled the room. They hurried back to the main hall where the rest of the team awaited. Dr. Price explained their findings and the plan to perform the counter-ritual. Despite their fear, the team agreed to proceed, knowing it was their only hope. As night fell, they prepared the sacrificial altar in the main hall, arranging the artifacts according to the instructions in the ancient book. The air grew heavy with anticipation, and the shadows seemed to press closer, watching their every move. Rachel lit the candles, her hands trembling. "We need to be quick. The Guardian will try to stop us." Dr. Price began the incantation, her voice strong and unwavering. The shadows surged forward, and the team formed a protective circle around the altar, their voices joining in the ancient chant. As the ritual progressed, the shadows became more aggressive, their whispers turning into screams. The air crackled with energy, and the ground trembled beneath them. Mark held up the ancient book, reading the final words of the incantation. With a blinding flash of light, the shadows exploded outward, revealing the figure of the Eternal Guardian, its form more solid and terrifying than before. It roared in anger, its eyes blazing with hatred. "You cannot bind me again!" it growled. "I am eternal!" Dr. Price stepped forward, holding the ceremonial dagger. "We will not bind you. We will banish you." With a final desperate effort, she plunged the dagger into the altar, completing the counter-ritual. The Guardian screamed, its form beginning to dissolve into shadows. The light grew brighter, and the oppressive darkness retreated, finally dissipating into nothingness. When the light faded, the cathedral was silent. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. The team stood together, breathing heavily, their faces showing a mix of relief and exhaustion. "We did it," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "We banished it." But as they looked around the empty cathedral, they knew their ordeal was not over. Thomas was still missing, and the dark history of the Cathedral of Saint Armand still held many secrets. With a renewed sense of determination, they vowed to uncover the truth and find their missing friend, knowing that the shadows of the past were never truly gone. The cathedral stood silent and still, yet the team felt the lingering presence of the darkness they had banished. The eerie calm that had settled over the ancient structure seemed almost fragile, as if the shadows were merely biding their time. Exhausted but resolute, the group gathered in the nave, their minds focused on finding Thomas and uncovering the cathedral's remaining secrets. "We need to find Thomas before it's too late," Rachel insisted, her voice edged with desperation. The counter-ritual was only the beginning. Dr. Price nodded, her expression grave. "The manuscripts hinted at more rituals. We need to search for any other hidden chambers or artifacts that might give us a clue." As they prepared to resume their search, Mark spoke up, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Before we go any further, we need to be careful. We don't know what other traps or spirits might still be here." The team agreed, each member wary and alert. They split into smaller groups, determined to cover as much ground as possible. Rachel, Dr. Price, and Mark headed towards the unexplored areas of the crypts, while the rest of the team focused on the upper levels of the cathedral. As they descended into the crypts, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The oppressive darkness seemed to press in on them, and every creak and groan of the ancient structure set her nerves on edge. They moved cautiously, their flashlights casting long shadows on the damp stone walls. In one of the deeper chambers, they found a series of carvings that depicted scenes of betrayal and sacrifice. The imagery was disturbing, showing cult members turning on each other in a desperate bid for power. Rachel's heart sank as she realized the parallels to their current situation. "These carvings," she said, pointing to the scenes, "they show members of the cult betraying each other. We need to be careful." Dr. Price nodded, her face pale. "The fear and paranoia that consumed the cult might be affecting us too. We need to stay united." As they continued their search, the sense of unease grew stronger. Mark, who had been quiet for most of the journey, suddenly stopped, his face contorted with a mix of fear and guilt. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice trembling. "I need to tell you something." Rachel and Dr. Price turned to him, their expressions wary. "What is it, Mark?" Dr. Price asked. Mark took a deep breath. "I've been hearing whispers, voices telling me to do things. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but now, I think the spirits are trying to manipulate us." Rachel's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Mark's hands shook as he continued. "Last night I saw Thomas. He was alive, but the shadows had him. They told me that if I helped them, they would let him go." Dr. Price stepped back, her eyes narrowing. "What did you do, Mark?" Mark's voice broke. I led them to the manuscripts. I thought it would help, but now I realize I've put us all in danger." Rachel's anger flared. "You betrayed us, Mark. You put all our lives at risk." Mark fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do. The fear, the whispers, they were too much." Dr. Price took a deep breath, her mind racing. "We need to find Thomas and stop whatever the spirits are planning. Mark, you need to come with us and help undo the damage you've caused." Mark nodded, his expression one of despair and resolve. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." As they pressed deeper into the crypts, the air grew colder, and the sense of dread became almost suffocating. They reached a large chamber, its walls lined with ancient relics and symbols. In the center of the room was a stone pedestal, upon which lay a bound and unconscious Thomas. Rachel rushed forward, her heart pounding. "Thomas! We're here!" As they approached, the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, swirling around them with a malevolent energy. The whispers grew louder, filling their minds with fear and doubt. Dr. Price shouted over the din. "We need to perform the counter-ritual again, here and now. It's our only chance." Mark and Rachel quickly set up the necessary artifacts, their hands shaking with fear. As they began the incantation, the shadows pressed closer, their whispers turning into screams. The room seemed to vibrate with dark energy, the air thick with malevolence. With each word of the incantation, the shadows recoiled, their forms flickering and dissolving. The light from the candles grew brighter, pushing back the darkness. As they reached the climax of the ritual, a blinding flash filled the room, and the shadows let out a final, agonized wail before disappearing entirely. When the light faded, Thomas stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Rachel knelt beside him, relief flooding her face. "Thomas, you're safe now." Thomas looked around, his expression dazed. "What happened? Where am I?" Dr. Price helped him to his feet. "You were taken by the spirits, but we've banished them. It's over now." As the team gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the cathedral, a sense of calm settled over them. The dark history of the Cathedral of St. Armand had been uncovered, and the malevolent spirits banished. But as they stepped into the light of day, they knew that the scars of their ordeal would remain. The betrayal and desperation they had experienced would haunt them, a reminder of the darkness that lurked within both the cathedral and their own hearts. And as they walked away, the cathedral stood silent and still, its shadows finally at rest. With Thomas safe and the malevolent spirits banished, the team returned to the inn, their relief tempered by exhaustion and lingering unease. They gathered in the common room, the flickering firelight casting warm shadows on their faces. Dr. Price addressed the group, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We've managed to banish the spirits and rescue Thomas, but our work isn't over. The Guardian may be gone, but the rituals performed in the cathedral have left deep scars. We need to complete the ritual of redemption to cleanse the cathedral fully and ensure this never happens again." Rachel nodded, her expression resolute. "We have to make sure the cathedral is safe, not just for us, but for anyone who comes here in the future." Mark, still grappling with his guilt, spoke up. "I'll help in any way I can. I owe it to all of you." Dr. Price gave him a reassuring nod. "We'll need all hands on deck. According to the manuscripts, the ritual of redemption is complex and requires several specific artifacts. We've already found most of them, but we need to prepare carefully." The team spent the next day meticulously planning the ritual. They gathered the artifacts, the ancient chalice, the ceremonial dagger, and the set of candles. They also discovered a sacred relic, a small, intricately carved statue that had been hidden in one of the cathedral's many alcoves. This relic was crucial to the ritual's success. As night fell, they returned to the cathedral, the atmosphere charged with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The nave, bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, seemed to watch them with silent expectation. Dr. Price began to set up the altar, arranging the artifacts with precision. "This ritual requires all of us," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "Each of us has a role to play, and we must be in perfect sync. Any mistake could be catastrophic." The team formed a circle around the altar, each member holding a candle. Dr. Price started the incantation, her voice calm and authoritative. The ancient words flowed from her lips, resonating with a deep, otherworldly power. As the ritual progressed, the air grew thick with energy. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The temperature dropped, and an eerie silence settled over the cathedral. Rachel stepped forward, holding the sacred relic. She placed it on the altar and began to chant, her voice joining Dr. Price's in a harmonious blend of ancient language. The relic glowed faintly, a soft light emanating from its carved surface. Mark, holding the ceremonial dagger, moved next. He cut a small incision on his palm, letting a few drops of blood fall into the chalice. "Blood to bind, blood to free," he recited, his voice steady despite the pain. The chalice glowed with an inner light, the blood mingling with the sacred energy. Thomas, though weak, held his candle high and added his voice to the incantation. "Spirits of the past, we seek redemption. By this ritual we cleanse these sacred grounds." The energy in the cathedral reached a crescendo, the light from the candles and the relic growing brighter and brighter. The ground trembled beneath them, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating through their bodies. With a final unified chant, they completed the ritual. The light exploded outward, filling the cathedral with a blinding brilliance. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of profound peace. When the light faded, the team found themselves standing in a cathedral that felt fundamentally changed. The air was warm and inviting, the shadows no longer menacing. The sense of dread and malevolence had vanished, replaced by a serene calm. Dr. Price looked around, a smile of relief spreading across her face. "We did it. The cathedral is finally at peace." Rachel embraced Thomas, tears of relief in her eyes. "We're free. It's over." Mark, still clutching the ceremonial dagger, let out a deep sigh. "I'm so sorry for what I did. Thank you for giving me a chance to make it right." Dr. Price placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all make mistakes, Mark. What matters is that we came together and fixed it." As they left the cathedral, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a golden light on the ancient structure. They knew their journey was not just about uncovering history, but about confronting and overcoming their deepest fears. The village welcomed them back, and the story of their ordeal quickly spread. The cathedral, once a place of darkness and terror, had been transformed into a symbol of redemption and resilience. With their mission complete, the team prepared to leave the village. They had forged unbreakable bonds through their shared experience and learned the true meaning of courage and unity. As they departed, the cathedral stood as a silent guardian of the past, its secrets finally laid to rest. And though the shadows of the past were gone, the memory of their ordeal would stay with them forever, a testament to the power of redemption and the strength of the human spirit. The morning after the ritual of redemption, the team gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the village. The air was crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere they had endured for so long. Yet, a sense of unease lingered. Despite the peace they had brought to the cathedral, there was a feeling that something remained unfinished. As they made their way to the village square, an elderly woman approached them. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she clutched a rosary tightly in her hands. "Please, you must come back," she pleaded. "The shadows have returned." The team exchanged worried glances. Dr. Price stepped forward, her expression grave. "What do you mean? We performed the ritual. The spirits should be at rest." The woman shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Last night the shadows came back, darker and more powerful. They say it's the Guardian seeking revenge." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "We need to go back. We can't leave the village like this." Dr. Price nodded. "Agreed. We have to face whatever is left and finish this once and for all." They hurried back to the cathedral, the morning light casting long shadows on the ancient stones. As they approached, they saw the once serene structure now seem to pulse with a dark energy. The doors creaked open, revealing an interior shrouded in darkness. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with malevolence. The air was cold, and the flickering light from their flashlights barely penetrated the gloom. The team moved cautiously through the nave, their breaths visible in the icy air. From the shadows, a low growl echoed through the cathedral, sending chills down their spines. The Guardian had returned, more powerful and vengeful than ever. Its glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, watching their every move. "We need to draw it out," Dr. Price said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "We can't let it hide in the shadows." Rachel stepped forward, her flashlight aimed at the Guardian. "Show yourself. We're not afraid of you." The Guardian roared, a sound that reverberated through the cathedral. It emerged from the darkness, its form a twisted mass of shadows and hatred. The team stood their ground, determined to face the entity head-on. "You think you can defeat me?" the Guardian growled, its voice a deep, rumbling echo. "I am eternal. I cannot be banished." Dr. Price raised the ceremonial dagger, her eyes locked on the Guardian. "We faced you before, and we will face you again. We have the power to end this." The team formed a circle, their hands clasped together as they began the incantation. The ancient words flowed from their lips, resonating with a power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cathedral. The Guardian lunged at them, but an invisible barrier held it back. The candles around the altar flared to life, their flames burning brightly. The team's voices grew louder, their determination unwavering. With each word of the incantation, the Guardian's form flickered and weakened. It roared in fury, thrashing against the barrier. The light from the candles intensified, pushing back the darkness. Rachel, holding the sacred relic, stepped forward. "By this relic, we bind you. By this light, we banish you." The Guardian screamed, its form beginning to dissolve. The light from the relic grew blinding, and the shadows retreated, swirling into a vortex of darkness. The ground trembled, and a deafening roar filled the cathedral as the Guardian was pulled into the void. When the light faded, the cathedral was silent. The oppressive darkness was gone, replaced by a sense of profound peace. The team stood together, their faces showing a mix of relief and exhaustion. "We did it," Thomas said, his voice shaking with emotion. "It's really over." Dr. Price lowered the dagger, her expression one of weary triumph. "The Guardian is gone. The cathedral is finally free." As they left the cathedral, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a golden light on the ancient structure. They knew their journey had not only been about uncovering history, but about confronting and overcoming their deepest fears. The village welcomed them back with open arms, grateful for their bravery and determination. The story of their ordeal quickly spread, and the cathedral, once a place of darkness and terror, had been transformed into a symbol of redemption and resilience. With their mission complete, the team prepared to leave the village. They had forged unbreakable bonds through their shared experience and learned the true meaning of courage and unity. As they departed, the cathedral stood as a silent guardian of the past, its secrets finally laid to rest. And though the shadows of the past were gone, the memory of their ordeal would stay with them forever, a testament to the power of redemption and the strength of the human spirit.